Our next presentation now is by Dr. James Moran, a Senior Lecturer in Ecology at the Atlantic Technological University. Thanks, James.
Right, thanks very much, Helen. I suppose in terms of finding common ground, I'll just maybe explain a bit about where I'm coming from, because I think that will help to find common ground. So I grew up on a dairy farm in Mayo, so I spent the first part of my life from that size wanting to be one thing and one thing only, and that was a farmer. Found out by the time I was 12 and 13 doing accounting for the leaving, I was having charge of doing the accounts. That wasn't maybe an option on a small dairy farm in the west of Ireland. So with the love of the environment, I went off to college and done environmental science in Galway. And after that, I worked as an advisor in the 90s for a while. A couple of years that I found, this isn't working out very well. So went back to college to do some work on agriculture and the environment as part of a PhD. Worked for Teagasc for 5 years, and then jumped out of Teagasc and went back into academia and done a lot of work with various projects, including the Burn programme, various European innovation partnerships around the country. So in terms of finding common ground, I have a lot of difficulty in my own head between my internal farmer, advisor, academic, and increasingly in the last 5 or 6 years heavily involved in the CAP. So the policy making head just confuses me totally altogether. So knowing that sort of a general background, I want to go through essentially some guiding principles in terms of what we've learned in terms of policy and practice, and in terms of the landscape and farmland biodiversity that we have in Ireland. A word or a nod to policy coherence and lack of policy coherence, and then a lot of what we've learned over the last while. Biodiversity can be very complicated when you look at it from a national and a global level, but on individual farms and individual fields and individual communities, it isn't that complicated, So a lot of what we should be doing is enabling the local, and this is where a lot of the work we've done over the last 10 or 15 years is coming up with this locally adapted, results-based approach, and I'll just talk about some key messages at the end. Also, in terms of finding common ground, I think it's very important that we have a common understanding. And I think the sustainability term is a thing we need to develop a definite common understanding from if we're going to talk about sustainable agriculture and land use and biodiversity's place within that. This is the best model I've seen to present sustainability. Sustainability, every time we talk about it, we have to talk about it in a holistic manner, encompassing the three aspects of economy, society, and environment. It's not a three-legged stool. The economy is simply, including responsible consumption and production, is simply a tool of a functioning society, including broader human health, well-being, education, zero hunger, and all of that society is dependent on the biosphere, the hydrosphere, atmosphere, and land. And it is the biodiversity that underpins everything we do. We have no society without the biosphere. We have no economy without a society, okay? The economy can collapse, and it often collapses on a 10-year or 20-year cycle. Society survives, okay? Society generally is relatively stable, but it does collapse every couple of 500 or 1,000 years as well, and the biosphere survives. If the biosphere collapses, goodbye, sayonara, we're gone, So fundamentally, we have to work from the bottom up. The problem is the society and the economy we're building is a heavy weight pressing down on the rest of it. So I think we need to have that fundamental understanding first. And in terms of this as well, the three aspects are not just three aspects, there are 17 goals as recognized by the United Nations into the Sustainable Development Goals. And to achieve them goals, the central axis of this is coordination and cooperation across society. Also, realizing this in terms of trying to work towards this sustainability goals, we have to realize that we've got a very diverse island. This is just a representation of the broad landscape classes. And even at every single colour we look at here, if we delve down in closer into the catchments, into the landscapes, into communities, it's multiple diversity within that as well. But this is only capturing at quite a large level. So we've everything from our intensified lowlands to relatively extensively used mountainous areas here in the brown. The green areas are our lowland areas. All of these areas are characterized by differences in geology, soils, climatic variation, and land cover with a diverse range of land use capacities. All this land cannot be all things to all people, okay? And we have to make sure that when we're actually managing this land or putting policies in place or practices in place, that one size does not fit all. Also, in terms of this land base, has to supply society with this diverse range of goods and services. So the Irish landscape has to provide us with all this. It needs to provide us with the food we eat, the raw materials for our housing, our fibre, our medicines. It needs to provide us with fresh water. But all of that, the provisioning service, is very much dependent on regulating and supporting services in terms of relatively stable climate, pollination services, basic photosynthesis, soil formation, nutrient cycling. And also, it has to provide us with a place in which we live, a home that contributes to human health and well-being in terms of wider cultural and aesthetic and recreational values. Major issue is our economy only pays and only recognises these provisioning services. And as a result, we have an undersupply of all the other non-marketable services on which our markets depend on. And what's worse is that the market even doesn't recognise the negative effects it has on the rest of these services. So we have to turn this around as well. Policy coherence. When we look at this in terms of the diversity of our land base, and this is just one island, when we look at this at a global level, the diversity of our land base, which produces our food, and the agricultural policy context in order to actually produce the food alone, but also when we're talking about producing all the other services and making sure we maintain all these other services, is complex. We have these diverse set of demands and needs. And what is vitally needed is policy and interdepartmental cross-government coordination of all this. And what the government needs to be doing is providing a foundation for enabling action across national, local, and even farm level and community level. And it needs to be agile and adaptive given the constraints we have. Big question is, would any of you say that it's coordinated at the moment? Do we have an integrated framework for action? Do we even know where we're going in this? And also, if we don't know where we're going, how are people going to decide on where the capacity and the resources are going to go to make things happen? Okay. So this is where a lot of the work we've been doing over the last number of years. We've worked a lot with local projects around the country, starting in the Burren around 20 years ago. And what we have found in terms of trying to incentivise improvements in biodiversity and the range of associated ecosystem services in terms of habitat quality to support biodiversity, water quality and water quantity, soil carbon, pollination, is that we come up with these relatively simple scoring systems for the land. We can score products in terms of their quality. It's the same thing. An area of land, what would a score for nature? And if you have a higher score, you get a higher payment, and this is paid through public subsidies. So then you have land, you can decide on your farm, well, what land is suitable for what services, what land is suitable for food production. The food production, this is assuming there's a functional market for food production as well. This is also creating a market for all the other services that are non-market within the environment. It's very much dependent on public subsidies, and I think we need to move into the realm of actually having private financing to coincide with that public subsidy, co-financing by the private sector. And that can be done through taxation, through levying, or we can come up with some fancy carbon trading or biodiversity credits or something. But we have the old reliable for the last 2,000 years of taxation to do this as well. This is where we came from in terms of developing this over the last number of years. We started in the Burn programme that Brenda might talk about later on in 2004, developing the concept of understanding the land, its capacity, its nature value, and how we actually create a system for paying for the results, supporting the farmers to deliver the results. That developed into the Burn programme in 2010, 2015. We were hoping at that stage it could be rolled out on a much wider basis nationally, but what was seen at the time was Burn was so unique, was it going to be the same at other places? Okay, so while the Burn was continuing to roll out, continuing to function from 2016 to 2023, we concentrated an awful lot in terms of scaling the principles of the Burn and seeing could the principles and the processes be adapted to broader landscapes. So we worked in areas like the Shannon Callows, the wet grasslands in Leitrim. We worked in Navarra in northern Spain, permanent crops, to try and adapt the same system to that area. Romania, we had projects in the UK as well, our project partners there. And we also looked to actually create a range of opportunities with European innovation partnerships, testing this results-based approach across the country with 2,000 farmers between 2016 and 2023. It was found that the process could be adapted to other regions of the country. Then we need to see, could it be worked on from an administrative perspective? Yeah, that's a long story, that one, we won't get into it. But the administrative capacity was tested. It was assumed that it could work, it should work, okay, and now it's being rolled out through the Acres Cooperation Programme to 20,000 farmers. So it is accepted that this should work, but there is a huge amount of challenges in terms of having the administrative systems, the IT systems to make and enable the local within what is at the moment quite restrictive administrative system that is very centrally based. It isn't maybe designed to facilitate the local, but there is work to be done on that. So in terms of, I know I've thrown a lot out there at the moment, this is what goes on in my head in terms of my inner trying to find common ground, but just to simplify it, I think it is quite simple in the end. We have to have a broad understanding of the policy context. And we need to make sure that this policy, as we are designing it, needs to enable positive action, incentivize delivery of results to combat the biodiversity and climate crisis that we're in, while supporting viable farms and meeting societal needs across these broad range of services. Rapid systems change is needed, and I think this has to be an evolution rather than a revolution, purely because we haven't got time to break up the whole system. Our system is totally dysfunctional at the moment in terms of our food system, but we haven't got the time to break it down. And I've also seen from working in the colleagues in the UK, when you blow up the Common Agricultural Policy, what you're going to get after a lot of pain afterwards is not an awful lot different, and there's a lot of hassle getting to that in terms of the post-Brexit sphere. So we haven't got time to blow up all our systems, but they have to adapt more rapidly than they are at the moment. Solutions need to be developed and locally adapted and scaled. We need to empower across society, the local communities and the producers and the consumers. Partnership is key in terms of building capacity and trust. It's essential to realise ambitious goals, and this will enable us to create the solutions and innovation as well. And what today is trying to achieve, I think, as well, is trying to promote and raise awareness. Society must demand and must recognise what agriculture and forest areas can produce outside just food and fibre. Food and fibre, of course, are key, but it's dependent on so much else and can provide so much else. And we need sustainable consumption to partner our sustainable production within the food system. Thank you very much.